Hey everyone, thanks for coming back after lunch. I'd like to introduce Phil Holbrook. He's a pen tester and he's going to be talking about some really interesting modern phishing techniques involving calendaring and other cool stuff. So please give a warm welcome to Phil.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So as we said, I'm going to be going over phishing with Google Calendars, Google Docs, and NoVNC, basically weird phishing techniques for 2022. So a little bit about me. Hi, I'm Phil Holbrook. Thank you for attending. You can find me on Twitter at FlipZero. You can find my blog at flipzero.io. I make no promises on updates on that blog or consistency or quality. I make no promises on any of those. You can find all the slides. I have some bits of code, some little tidbits in the GitHub repo for this thing. I posted it last night. It should be up. So there will be bits of code on the screen. Don't stress about them. They're in the GitHub repo. Grab them later. And yeah, I'm a senior penetration tester for a company called Shellman, doing a variety of engagements, anything from internals to web apps to mobiles to we get into a bunch of stuff. So what I'm focused on today is phishing. So let's dive right into Google Calendars. So I started doing these campaigns after a coworker had followed a run through the BHIS had posted on setting up the Google API account, setting up a Google API account to send calendar events as a form of phishing. And you're just assuming, you have to know that the client is going to be using Google Calendars to accept those events, obviously. But I'm not going to do much of a deep dive into what that setup process looks like to getting the calendar invite running. But I'm going to more focus on the pretext and how we're kind of coercing people into doing things they should not be doing. Quick run through of what that setup looks like. You're in a Google account, you're in GCP. I'm going to fly right through this thing. The video is in the GitHub repo. Basically, you're just setting up an account. You're setting up an application within GCP. I'm going to screw up scrubbing through the window, as you do. You're setting up an OAuth client on it, and then you're getting into OAuth Playground, where you're authorizing the OAuth Playground to access your Google Calendar for the event, for the account that you set up here. So the end goal here, once you scrub on through, is getting to the end where we can pull an access token for another application to access your Google and send events as it. So that's where BHIS's tool Mail Sniper comes in, and I'm going to flip over to an attacker box for a little bit of a demonstration of what I was doing here. So basically, I've got Mail Sniper already loaded right into PowerShell, and I've got a templated out command here, which I'm going to put up big on the screen here in a second. Basically, what we're doing is we're sending a calendar invite to myself, and I'm just filling in that access token in a placeholder I had sitting in the command string. And let that play out. It'll just spit out one little line saying it and inject it into that target calendar. Cool, it should be on my target's calendar now. Flip over to my calendar. Sometimes it takes a refresh to show up. We got a test meeting. So cool, we just sent a calendar invite from myself to myself. Not super interesting. Let's break down what exactly we just did here. So this command for Mail Sniper, basically what we're doing on parameters is you're sending the primary email. That is the email you're sending as your token. We just pulled out of GCP. Targets, this is just double quotes, comma separated targets. You can throw a ton of them in there. I've done 100 or so at a time. You can blow that thing out. Start time, end time for the event, title, description, location. Super simple. So let's look at this calendar event that dropped onto my target's calendar here. Test meeting, Zoom link to follow. It's sent from me to me. This thing sucks. There's nothing fun about this at all. It's not spicy at all. Nobody's going to click it. Let's add a little more fun to it. I did want to note, too, by design of this whole thing, that calendar event's already accepted. It's going to alert 10 minutes before. So no matter what you drop on somebody's calendar, they're going to get notified of it. So there's a higher chance that somebody's going to notice that, especially if they are living out of their Google Calendar day to day. So here's a second iteration of this whole calendar event drop. For this one, we register bsidespgh-ctf.com. That is my domain now. I will happily loose that one once we are done here. But for the moment, that is mine. I need it. Set that domain up through a Google account so that you can send as that domain, and set up a junk email address for human resources or HR at bsidespgh-ctf.com. That's a mouthful. I need to trim that at some point here. Whew. So the context here we're putting is we're just going to drop a random calendar event on somebody's calendar saying, hey, you have an HR meeting. It starts at 9 o'clock in the morning. Join immediately, discuss an incident. That's all. Leave it nice and bland. because then you're just like brimming with details. What happened? What's going on? What did I do? I'm going to click the Zoom link because it's a Zoom link, not a Zoom link. It's an easy trick. It's an easy trick to do. People will look over it though. All you see is your company at the beginning. It's got the US and the thing you expect at the end, so whatever. So that's just a simple one that you can do. So the event now looks pretty good as opposed to what we started as. The downside of this one is if they click the link, we can kick them to, you know, a super basic app that's just going to capture creds. We can kick them to an Evil Engine X link, something out of Mod Lishka that'll you know, man in the middle. It might get a session token to a one login session, an Okta session, something interesting that may have more access. You may also get somebody's like burner home Zoom creds that they just gave you and now you have nothing. So what would be really fun is if we could shell an endpoint using this whole technique and transfer method of dropping events on people's calendars. So that's what this this now third iteration of this thing is. Changes the highlight. So we're still sending from HR at B-sides, same target, start time, end time. I love doing 9 in the morning to their standard time, wherever they're at. You're kind of woozy, you might be hungover, you're not as likely to second guess a weird link. This time we target it out where we're saying there's federal compliance required next steps, and we give them some links to some Google Docs. You need to review these steps and get these steps completed. So now we're pushing them off to some further instructions to give them something more malicious to do. So what we run for this campaign is something like these 2 Google Docs I've got up here. Again, full credit to a previous colleague who set up this kind of format and worked in some of the really legalese kind of scary language. Basically what this Google Doc is stating, and we're just telling the user a story right now of there's an upcoming FedRAMP audit for the B-sides PGH CTF federal offering. That's a lot. So we're telling them that there's bad stuff going. There's compliance audit coming up. We give them a call to action saying that failure to complete these steps could result in a high finding on the audit. An appropriate action may be taken against you. Nobody wants to be that person that doesn't do something, then causes a high finding on an audit, but you also don't want to be the one that does too much, and then you cause the high finding on the audit. So it's a tough one. The Mac example here instructs the user on how to open terminal via Spotlight, then tells them to copy and paste this curl command into their terminal and run it. The curl command runs all it does is pulls a remote script from my attacker box sitting out, you know, in like EC2 or wherever you want to host the thing. It isn't readily malicious just looking at it. If you've ever installed like Homebrew on a Mac, Homebrew's homepage has you install it just the same way. It's one big gross curl command that then pipes into Bash and it takes care of it, install everything that is Homebrew on your Mac. So it's not super malicious. I also always giggle at the PowerShell encoded command example because that thing looks like hell. That's terrifying. But apparently that's just me that thinks that because people still run the thing. So here's what that campaign actually looks like live. So just to break down what we're looking at here. Top right terminal, a little bit up yonder. That is my EC2 box that's got just an Apache web server sitting on it. I'm just tailing the access logs right now so we can see any traffic coming back. Because we are, go back. Round 2. We're back to the attacker box. On the left side, you have my victim machine where the victim just ran that curl command. It's a little small. I'm going to put up a next slide that kind of breaks it out more. But all the script does right now is says, hey, I see you're a Mac. I'm configuring the environment. We're going to start doing some checks and whatever. And we put on, you know, the song and dance of normal things are happening here. You get a keychain access pop-up box saying it wants your admin password right now. That's pretty standard for a Mac user. It's, you know, a lot of Mac users are going to be local admins on their machine because it's just about miserable to not be an admin on your Mac. So that's a pretty common thing you're going to get. So they'll probably just chuck their password right into it. If you do notice it's not, you know, starring out the password, there's a reason for that. That script will then run. It says it runs its configs. It's on a sleep right now for 10 seconds, and then it just completes and says that everything's fine. Go ahead and close the window. So I pulled the attacker box back up right at the end of that clip where we have this big gross blob of base64 that got posted back to my Apache server. So what just happened here? What did this user just do? Code on screens. This is going to be great. I'm sure it looks wonderful. The left script is the very first script that this user called. This script is total BS except for one line of it that's highlighted in bold right in the dead middle, where it's basically just giving all of the song and dance. It's saying that you're setting up the environment, you're doing this and that. Everything's fine. Thank you for running this curl script. Dead center of it is calling a secondary script. So that's what's on the right side. On this one, we give up the campaign at this point. We'll be a little nice about it. If there's blue team chasing us around, we'll say outright that if you've landed on this page, it's an approved campaign, please contact Phil. It won't always be Phil. It'll usually be like a point of contact for the company, someone we're working with on the pen test. A little more trustworthy, not Phil. And then below, I have a whole string of variables that are getting run on this user's machine right now. So basically, we're just stacking up any command I want to run on this machine. I'm gathering the input for it, stacking it into some variables, and then bringing it all back in that big gross post message you saw here. Number 4, this dialog text OSA script box, that is just a big chunk of Apple script that all it's doing is drawing that box. It's drawing a text box in it. It's telling it to have no characters sitting in it already. And then that last little bit for this system applications utilities keychain part is just pulling the icon for the actual keychain application. It's in the same place on every Mac, so let's use it. It looks all the better. Excuse me. And finally, in number 5, all those variables that we just pulled from that machine are all getting gathered into a single string variable and base64 encoded. And then the whole thing gets curl posted back to my Apache server. So this is just a pile of exfil that we just got a user to run. So what that looks like once we take it out and decode it, again, that's the blob that we got. CyberChef in the background, nothing fancy. Do a base64 double decode, paste that blob in there, and now we got all this beautiful information out of this user's machine. We know the username that ran it, we know the host name of the machine, we know the build and various different little details that'll be nice and unique. We also grabbed the B-side rules password that was put into that box, into the keychain access box, as well as some AWS keys. So this user just gave us a wonderful foothold into a potential environment. So that's just a real slimmed down example also of what we can pull back. I've done fancier versions of that where you do I did a third script one time where you fork it and have it do clipboard dumping basically. And every 5 minutes it was just pasting the clipboard into a variable and then kicking it back to me with an identifier so I knew which machine it came from. So you're basically key logging at that point, and that thing was just forked and set to run for about, I think it was set to run for an hour. And I got a ton of stuff back of that. So, I mean, it's all about what the client's comfortable with. Obviously, we're not going to go too aggressive without their approval, but yeah, that's just an example of what kind of data you can get back from people. For the Windows version of that whole script, I cheaped out. You get a screenshot of a PowerShell window. All it does is it just says checking PC configuration. It says it's complete, close the window, whatever. And then the string you get back once it's decoded is just a host name and a who am I, which was redundant in this case because the who am I had the host name and the machine in it. That's what you get there from Windows. Points made though. You're executing code at this point. We're getting code execution on remote endpoints. Some people would say this is not that malicious. You're not really emulating an active attack. My EDR AV X amount solution would detect it if it were malicious. I disagree. I would say that an active, persistent attacker is going to scope out your environment to death, and they will get this thing right and evade whatever control you got in place, and they're still going to get that code execution. So now they're still going to potentially land on an end user's machine and then go wherever they can from there. So moving on to a little more fancy version of this whole campaign. I decided at some point that the curl command was too suspicious. It's a little too weird. Let's overcomplicate it to death and say we're going to backdoor Firefox and have users download that. So let's make up a campaign here. For this doc, I'm telling the users that we're rolling out a federally optimized version of Firefox. The binary that they're clicking here, I reworked. If you've ever used Mythic C2, there's a dev out there. I know his name's Doomfist. I have no idea who that person actually is. He made this super cool connector into Mythic C2 where basically it just ties right in, yanks a payload, packages it up beautifully in a DMG, a PDF. He's got a whole ton of containers in there that do wonderful things. It's all super cool. It's a little aggressive for my use case here, you know, for what I really need to get out of people. I just need to know whether they ran the command. Shelling all these boxes is super fun and all, but clients don't usually appreciate it, and it makes cleanup a little messy, so trying to take a bit of a softer touch here. So that's what this app Fisher repo at the bottom, top right is. I wrote up that I just basically took his project, ripped it to pieces, and then pulled it down to where all it does is look for your applications folder. If Firefox is installed, yanks it into a build directory. It replaces the main Firefox executable with my own shell script, which all it is doing is just the same curl command. It's all just nestled inside Firefox. And then at the end of it, it also calls the actual Firefox binary. So as far as the user is concerned, they just ran Firefox. They don't know all the nastiness that just happened in the background. Downside of this whole situation is, in doing so, we broke signing on Firefox, and it's now going to have an unidentified developer pop-up come up. And as you know, it normally wouldn't do that because it's Firefox. It's worth saying too, I stuck with using the DMG method of transfer just because I know like ISOs are kind of hot right now for evading AV. As far as Macs go, Mac users download DMGs all the time. It's pretty standard. It's pretty normal. It's pretty safe. It's going to get there fine. So you just know it's going to land on the user's machine without any trouble. Back to the instructions. So this is the Google Doc, heavily cropped to try to make all this madness fit on one slide. All we're doing is we're telling the user to download Firefox from this link, Firefox fed from this link. I have a GitHub repo that is bsides-pgh-ctf. That is also mine. You can have that as well. I want it for right now though. That one's a really great idea that whenever you download that Firefox DMG, you don't get a pop-up saying that this DMG is coming from sketchy domains with sketchydmgs.com. It's coming from GitHub. It's fine. It's trusted. You run it. Just run the code from GitHub. It'll be okay. And people do. So it adds a level of trust to the whole thing. Further down through the steps that I gave them here, I tell them not to copy Firefox fed out to their applications folder like DMGs commonly tell you to do. I do that for two reasons. One, I'm trying to be a little nice about the campaign that's aggressive in downloading malware on people's computers and make cleanup a little bit easier. So that way all they should have to do is just kill Firefox, eject the DMG, and chuck it in the trash. Done. You're clean after that. Second part of that is also just to avoid further detections if possible. That's a bit of a two-parter. The fun part of this campaign too, since we broke the signing and verification, I tell them right in the steps, click cancel whenever you get the pop-up that says, hey, the developer is not, we don't know who the developer is. Throw in parentheses, it's Apple's fault. We're waiting on them to approve our sign certificate. It'll be taken care of in a future release. Don't worry about it. You're just setting expectations. And as long as everything goes as you're telling them, they're like, yeah, this is normal. The sketchy Google Doc told me that was fine, so it's probably fine. So then you just tell them to right-click open it. They'll get the open thing, skip past the developer's unknown. So for this one, for the keychain prompt, I tweaked it up a little bit, and I say, so I want your keychain password, because we need admin for reasons. Then, with no spaces, I want you to add in your MFA token at the end from your OneLogin app. That one came out of a campaign where a client was using YubiKeys everywhere. And it took a minute for me to dial it back and go, well, I mean, YubiKeys get lost, they get broken. They've got to have a backup method here. OneLogin. They're using OneLogin as a backup method. So everybody's got OneLogin and their YubiKey. So just tell them not to use the YubiKey. I want your OneLogin token. Again, you're telling the user what to do. They'll probably just do it. It all seems normal, kind of. So then finally, for the last step down here, I give them something to do at the end to kind of close the loop. We tell them that the application should launch. If it doesn't, make sure you hit that "It failed" button. The relevant information will be gathered and sent to the development team. Again, that's a two-parter. We're trying to, give the user closure on the whole campaign. It's done. They're happy. They feel like they did what they were told to do by sketchy Google Doc. But also, they're not going to open up a help desk ticket or report it to a SOC saying, hey, what's this thing we were supposed to, I did it and it's not working. What are we doing here? So we'll hopefully keep it from getting burned too early too. So again, it's just a big pile of tell the users what to expect and they'll usually follow you right along. What that campaign looks like live is like this. So here we got my target. He's got lots of fun calendar events up because I didn't clear any of them before I took the video. So he's got a whole stack of them here. He's going to flip over to the Google Doc. This is what the actual Google Doc looks like when it's not all blown out and cropped. And I think I second guess it like crazy. I don't think it looks terrible, but also it looks terrible. So it's a tough one to justify. But then user follows the steps. He's downloading Firefox Fed, hits allow on it to download it. It did say it was coming from github.com, so not somewhere sketchy, weird. Run it. Should be able to right-click and open it as soon as previous me quit screwing around. There you go. Get going. Me. Right-click and open it. Pops up. Gatekeeper does say it's just got the mark of the web on it. Proceed as normal. I want your admin password. I want your MFA token. Firefox opens. Nothing the sketchier. So I mean, as far as users know, there's nothing super malicious going on here. Just because we set all those expectations, we kind of built a story. And I think it's a weird campaign to do too, where you're almost like, if somebody trusts this thing, it's got to be a really hacky IT department or something that does weird stuff, because like this is not a normal way to deploy an application. And that's usually what I kind of much more professionally say as a remediation effort. You know, obviously user training, don't run random code from random places. Think about these three things. You know, where did this calendar event come from? Do I know this domain? Do I know this person? You know, the application, is it expected? Have you been told about this at all? Has there been any internal communication that a federally optimized version of Firefox is coming out? Sounds suspicious, but you know, people do it. So that's just a really weird way to attack Macs specifically. And you can use the Google Calendar way to do it. You can technically just send them the doc. I've done that way too, since Google Docs go through email perfectly fine. I mean, what's going to flag on a Google Doc link in an email? So at least it's not just an Evil Engine X link that's going to get scanned to hell and then burned and then your campaign's torched in no time. It's a Google Doc. And it's one of those things that I know, like BHIS has reported the thing to death. Google don't care. It's a feature. They love it. So that campaign's hanging around for a while. I'm going to keep running it until it gets boring in some way. So I'll pause there for a hot sec before I go into the second phishing vector I'm going to talk about. Questions at all? Thoughts? Go for it. Have I tried this attack with Microsoft? Specifically, I did go down that road actually after the previous coworker had set this whole thing up, and I went, there's got to be a way to send these things through calendar, through you know, O365 in some way. I went a couple rabbit holes deep on it. I couldn't find a way to do it. So I'm not saying there's not a way, but it'd be interesting to see for sure. So cool. We're gonna go straight to the next one. NoVNC Docker phishing. This one's a weird one. This one, it kind of leans more towards a hyper-targeted technical exercise at the end of the day. And the first attempt I had at actually running this on a live client was met with intense lag over the NoVNC session. I'm pretty sure that was an issue on their side because they had a lot of web filtering going on. They were also not geographically really close at all to the region the EC2 box was sitting in. So I haven't lost full hope on it yet, especially after setting everything up for these slides and whatnot. I kind of revisited and pruned it a little bit, and I got it fancied up a little more. So I don't know. I might have to run this thing again in the future just to see if I can get someone to do it. But this whole setup is based off this article by Mr. Docs, linked at the bottom of the slide over here. Basically, what he went through doing is he described how you would set up a single burner box with NoVNC server set up on it. He would then hide as much in NoVNC as possible so you don't really know you're looking at a VNC session. And then you'd put a login page of whatever you want the target to log into up full screen in kiosk mode in Firefox. That way it's just it looks nice and clean. There's no secondary URL bars that you're like nested because you're in a VNC session in my random Linux Docker container. So it's a really weird campaign to set up. But basically the intended use case here is you're going to send a user a link to your own browser, kind of. They're going to log into that browser. Once they've logged in, we have a bunch of options. I can either just cut access to NoVNC, no longer let them externally access it. I've still got it though. So now I'm logged in as them and I can just take over their session on that Docker container because they've logged in on it. We can dump cookies out of that browser session. I've played with a couple different ways to dump cookies at disk. I mean, you can just throw a Chrome extension in. That'll take care of that for you, no problem too. Or you can just filter them all through an HTTP proxy. Just log all the traffic, grab the session tokens right out of that, off you go. Go plug them into your own browser from there. There's a bunch of different end games you can go with here. But this is all just kind of going over the transportation mechanism that is this weird NoVNC setup. So let's, what I'm going to talk about more on my side of this thing is my efforts to take his idea, scale it, and then secure it and lock it down a little bit inside Docker. Because whenever I first set his up, I did it on a burner EC2 and got out of the kiosk mode in Firefox, and I was all of a sudden root in a random Ubuntu box. And I went, no, that's not good, because I'm in like our pen test lab right now. No, I don't like this at all. So we're gonna contain this monster a little bit. So here's what this thing looks like when it's deployed. This is bone stock. You pull down this Ubuntu VNC XFCE container, and this is what you look at. You navigate to the local listening port, go to vnc.html. You're looking at a login page. User's supposed to click connect. They'll get a password prompt if you set a password on it. It's kind of basic, it kind of sucks. It's a little underwhelming. So we go through a bunch of Mr. Docs' steps here, spruce it up a little more as we go. So he did a cool thing, just a super obvious thing at the end of the day, of doing the parameters right in the URL bar for the auto-connect, the resize, the password. So that way, whenever you give somebody the control link for this VNC session, they click it, they drop right into the window, they don't gotta click anything, they don't even know it's a VNC session. We still have toolbars and whatnot popping up here, we got a little status bar up here, so that's kind of a dead giveaway. So let's fix that. So inside NoVNC, you can go through and you can do the title bar and the favicon through under that directory. There is the vnc.html and a ui.js that control all these things that are shown to the users. So after tearing through those, modified them so the toolbars are gone, you get rid of the status bar, renamed the vnc.html to bsides.html. At least it's something expected at that point. If you want to try to replicate this madness, I do have the ui.js and the vnc.html that I've already got modified in the GitHub repo for this whole thing, so those are ready to go. You can tinker with them still, obviously, but I just wanted to save somebody else that pain, because this is the final product that I ended up coming up with here, which doesn't actually look bad full screen here. So we added a domain now. We tuck this thing back behind mimecast-1.bsidespgh-ctf.com. Also made the password at the very end a bit more complex instead of just password. So it looks a little, it's just a big blown out URL in a bar. So you may look over it. What this thing looks like live is like this. And this is just my machine accessing this control link right away. And it's super fast because I've already got the Google sign-in page set up in the Docker container, already ready to go. So that way, as soon as the user clicks it, they're looking at that login page. So it's super fast. Whenever you're typing, there's a noticeable lag. It's a little bit. It feels off. There's a twitch of something feels wrong here. There's also not a paste for some reason, which is a problem, because then now like people have, you know, their password managers, the one autofill, and it's not going to work for some reason. That I didn't notice till this morning when I did my run through. That save login box, that's on my Docker container. That's not my local Firefox's save login box. So that's a problem. So that needs disabled too. Just in the final one I've got sitting out on Docker Hub right now. But that's basically what that container looks like whenever we send it to a person. Nuts and bolts. If you want to do this, I commend you first of all, because it's insane. And I hope somebody follows this thing up and improves it and does something better than what I did here, because I'm a mess. But what I've got set up so far is you can pull that image off of Docker Hub right now. To do this whole thing with multiple clients, you got to set up an HTTP proxy in front of it. So that's what the second chunker down here is, where you're just building a Ubuntu box with, you just got to put Apache on it. I've got an example of a vhost config that makes this madness work all proxied pretty well. Finally, you're spinning up that actual NoVNC container. If you're not comfortable with Docker, I know I'm sure not. I got this much down, where you're exposing 6901 externally, piping it to 6901 internally, name it user1. This is the container that we're running. After that's spun up, you're then running Firefox inside that container. So we're telling Docker user1 run for display1, run Firefox to this URL in kiosk mode. Fork it, exit. So that sets up that Docker container to be ready for a user to access it. Try and give a little more visual to what this disgusting final product ends up being. So the way I've got it set up right now for the bsides pghctf.com domain, I have 3 A records on it right now for Mimecast 1, 2, and 3. All of those point to the main domain. They hit my HTTP proxy, and then they go down to Docker user 1. It's user 1 also in the second one. That should be user 2. And user 3. And then 6901, 692, 693. So we're just routing all of this traffic and trying to coordinate it so we can have multiple of these instances running at one time. So then I wanted to at least show the vhost on the right side here, where it's the same deal. You just run a bunch of these in one big site configuration for Apache, where you're doing Mimecast 1, knows it needs to go to WebSocket 6901. It's important because NoVNC works out of WebSockets. And then 6901 for the localhost of the HTTP connection. So all you would do is for then Mimecast 2, change it. Mimecast 2, 6902, 6902. However many more times you want to run this thing or how many people you want to try and get at one time. So writing all of those Docker commands, the spin up, let's say you want to attack 30 clients, that's all really gross. I started refining some of these slides earlier this week, and I was going to commit some time to building a wrapper script, building some kind of a little application, something to make this deployment a little easier. I went with Excel. I went with Excel. We now have Excel, which I'll show this disgusting pile of madness, where this is the best idea I got cooked up right now. So again, I welcome anybody else's ideas or inputs on this thing, where that looks horrible. But basically all it's doing is just big old concatenate commands, where I'm taking the variables that are going to change, like the port number for 6901 down to 69, God, I think that's a 34. That's a little pixelated. You naming the container 1 through 34, you join the whole thing at the end, and then you just copy that whole pile of Dockers, paste values back into your working sheet. So now we can at least prep this campaign for like a go live day. That way you don't got to sit here and build these things manually. I have separate sheets set up right now for then running the Firefox command in all of these containers. So then that way at least it's not too terrible, where day of you're trying to run this thing, all you got to do is go grab your big pile of Docker builds. It'll make all of your containers and get them up and running. Give it a second for them to spin up. Go hammer all of your Docker Firefoxes. Now Firefox is open on whatever your login page is. It's ready to go for clients to access them. Final sheet is the phishing URLs. All I'm doing there is Mimecast 1 through 34, and then just joining them, and there's all your phishing URLs. So however you want to get those to your users, through a script, through a GoFish, however you want to send the links to people, that's the links you can just drop off to your users, and they'll just be able to hit it, hop right into the VNC session that we're looking at here. Whew, that's a lot of madness. Let's get my mouse back over here. Final wrap up. So, issues with this whole thing. Obviously, you can break out of that kiosk mode. That one scared me after I first set it up, and I was running as root on that first machine. And I went, okay, so we're gonna do. I'll Dockerize it. I'll make it kick the default user down to, I think its like name is headless by default in that Docker container. He's just a low level, nothing user. All he can run is Firefox. So I've tried to lock him down a little bit. I did some other steps to like you white out the background inside the VNC session, hide the icons, try to tuck it away as best you can. I had played with theming the Ubuntu a little bit based on whether they have Macs or Windows, because I remember a client saying specifically that the mouse cursor looked weird as soon as she went to like go put in the login creds, and I went, all right, that can be worked with, okay. So that's a little weird, but it's something that could be improved here. Resources. This thing actually is not that resource intensive. I did a T3A in EC2, and it ran 20-ish containers without issue. And we had the whole team of us hammering it at one time, chucking in creds. It seemed to work okay, but that was also with all of us with like a direct VPN connection to our own lab. So it was a little bit of variable there. Future improvements, some logical form of automation, because this is horrible. This is not automated well, and I don't know, I'm just maybe being overly critical on self, but also it's not that clean. So I want to work in some way to do some kind of a helper script or something that makes spinning this campaign a little more friendly, because it's about less than friendly right now. Password manager compatibility, like I said, for whatever reason, NoVNC does copy and paste. You can copy and paste in and out of that thing. I don't know if I broke it in modifying the UI.js or HTML file. That's entirely possible. I got to troubleshoot that. I want to figure out why the copy and paste isn't working. I thought of it this morning too when I did a dry run of these slides, where I know the hack the box virtual machines, whatever they're using, I want to go see what they're using now, because I know theirs are stellar and like the latency is like 0 and you can copy and paste in and out of them, and they work great. So that may be like a logical next step in just basing this whole container around whatever fanciness they got going on. They may just have a lot of bandwidth going in the machines, and that's why they run good. I don't know, gonna chase that one. Finally, just some firmly documented way of dumping cookies. I had a couple harebrained ideas of doing, just a Chrome or Firefox extension or something that would then, just dump to like a big bind mount share for all the Docker containers, and you could just watch like the HTTP log, know when you need to go look for fresh cookies, so you can just go plug them into your own computer, your own session or something. I'm not sure. I don't know. I keep talking myself in different directions on that one. I mean, half the time you can just, throw Evil Gen X running on the same machine, push them all to that instead of playing with like trying to capture anything weird. And then that works perfectly fine, because now your Evil Gen X link is not exposed, and it's stuck in this weird pile of Docker madness, and it'll still work though. So at least your link is protected at that point, and you're not at too much of a risk to get burned from there. So that's basically what I had for you guys today. I have been Phil. I thank you all very much for attending my talk, and I appreciate B-Sides for letting me ramble for 40 minutes very much. Thank you very much. Everyone have a good rest of your day. Got 10 minutes for questions. Got 10 minutes for questions. Oh God, please. Please let me free. Nah, anybody have any questions about either of these mildly ridiculous campaigns?
How successful were they?
For the NoVNC one or for the Google Calendar stuff? Or I guess either. So the Google Calendar one's super successful. That one runs really good. It seems, I know for the Firefox Fed version of it, I got a lower hit rate on that, but I haven't batted 0. So I'll take it. A hit's a hit. So yeah, that one's kind of fun. NoVNC one, I got to see yet. I bailed out of that one after the first client test with it, and it was super laggy. And I went, okay, this is too beta. I'm just going to reel back to something I know works, and that's the way I went with it instead. So again, after doing this prep for these slides and everything, it kind of reignited a little bit, and I went, okay, this isn't that terrible. I was able to get it spun back up and improved a little bit. I fought getting SSL working on the proxy like crazy for some reason, and then I did it again, and it just worked, and I went, okay. So I was just in a rabbit hole somewhere, and it worked the second time. So I don't know. I'm going to revisit that one again. I'm curious to run it and see if people fall for it or not. It's a weird one for sure, but yeah, good.
So, for places that do occasionally have legitimate stuff that looks uncomfortably close to Google Phishing, what do you think is the best way for them to recognize, or the best thing to tell you to recognize this?
So, question being, so like a company has a relatively sketchy way of deploying things, but then we're coming in with an equally sketchy way of deploying a malicious app or something. How do you best give them feedback on what to improve? Is that basically it?
What do you tell the users to try to mitigate that attack?
I mean, you just have to set expectations, really. It's the same deal with the Firefox Fed one, where you're telling them it's going to say it's untrusted. Hey, this is malware, but it's not malware. Go ahead and run it. They might run it.
I mean, looking at this from the other side, what do the good guys tell the users to not get caught by that sort of thing?
So that one comes down to, I mean, it all started at the Google Calendar invite or this random Google Doc that they got. Where'd that Google Doc come from? Do you know this account? Is bsidespgh-ctf.com a domain you expect to receive IT deployment instructions from? Probably not, unless you're the bsidespgh-ctf. I don't know. Maybe they'll fall for it. Let's give it a try? Question mark. There's a bunch of indicators, stuff like that. I mean, the one I always fall back on too is you're deploying an app in a federal environment. You don't question that at all because you got an event on your calendar? Wouldn't you like hit an IT person, hit a coworker, is any of this expected? Have you had a training regarding this when you were accessing the federal environment? You're showing how to do it for that company because everyone does it in their own interesting way. This should be well out of the ordinary as to what they were showing to do this. So I would say it's just there's a lot of indicators of sketchy here. And if it's all way out of the ordinary, then you should probably stop and go, maybe I'll ask somebody before I do this. Yeah, maybe I'll ask somebody. So that's basically where I would probably go with that. And any one of those options there. Any other questions? Go ahead. So does the calendar event evade I'm not sure what company you said. Cofence. So it just like throws an alert on it or something that this is from like an external sender or something sketchy?
No, it's more of where a user can report it, right? So we do our phishing campaigns, they're pure email, right? This calendar thing's very intriguing. I would love to do something like this, but I'm not sure. I have to go back and look. I just can't remember my own environment if I would hit something like that Cofence button.
Gotcha. So the question's basically, will that calendar invite whole setup get past, an email defense of some kind? And then what is the user supposed to do with the thing once they got it? How do they report it? How do they acknowledge they saw it? It's bad. I didn't do the bad thing. That's a tough one because it's possible no matter what through Google right now, through the API. It's not something a spam filter is going to see. There's not a report button on there. I do have a script that I cooked up after we had done, I don't know, maybe 100 or so people, and then the question was asked after of, well, I want all those gone now, and I went, yeah, we should probably do that. Hang on. Let me do that real quick. And it took a little tinkering with the API, but I got it. And he just does a quick run through, and it gets rid of all of them. So we can clean up the environment. We're not messing people's stuff up. But yeah, there's not a good defense on that from a product standpoint, as far as I know. I mean, I think the only mitigation I've seen is people stop using the Google Calendar. They use Google Workspace for email and whatnot still, but I guess I don't know if those people specifically had identified an issue in the Google Calendar. They had something better they were using, but they just didn't use the Google Calendar. They locked it out through the G Suite admin or Google Workspace admin. Yeah. Any other questions? Cool. Shutting it down. Thank you very much, everybody.